Professor, everybody knows that you are a renowned expert on China issues and have researched and observed China's politics, economy, and public policies. The 20th National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party is not only a major event in China, but has also attracted global attention. In the National Congress, there are usually no discussion, but rather making announcement on important conclusions. And based on your observation, what issues may cause concerns for the U.S. and the whole world?
Yes, likewise, it's great to see you again. I think what we're going to see, it's already obvious that Xi Jinping is going to cement his position as the supreme leader in China. And that does have policy consequences, which means that I think we're going to be seeing continuity rather than any significant change, which I think means, for example, for outsiders looking in, the continuation of the COVID policy, which of course has disrupted supply chains and has made China's global integration more problematic. But I think also what we will see is an emphasis on what he talks about as being the new global order and the need for China to strengthen its security. So what does that mean in practical terms for the world outside? I think it means, first of all, that China will continue to pursue, as far as is possible, agreements with those other countries that do not accept a Western-dominated global order. The obvious example being Putin in Russia, but also Iran and a number of other countries scattered across the globe. I think secondly, it means that China will continue its push to be what Xi Jinping says is a rule maker of global norms rather than a rule taker. And that means in organizations such as the UN human rights regime, it's going to keep pushing against that to make sure that its interests are represented and those of the West are suppressed. I think it also means that it will push to have more influence in international organizations, particularly those that are concerned with setting global standards for new industries. And I think the last point I would just say, which might have some global relevance, is that I think one of the things it has taken away as a lesson from what has happened in the Ukraine is it needs to isolate itself more from possible constraints and pressures from the West. So getting more independence in terms of Western technology, financial markets, and trade more generally.
As everybody knows that during every National Congress, it symbolized the power reshuffle, as well as the future direction for China in the next 5 or even 10 years, as Xi Jinping might reveal who will be his future successors and who are the likely candidates, you guess, and how will this impact China's diplomatic and economic landscape in the future?
Well, of course, we don't know. We will know in a week's time. But I think if you look at the structure of who's coming to the Congress and who's likely to be in the Central Committee, they are overwhelmingly acolytes or people placed by Xi Jinping. So that means he's got a really strong grip on the party apparatus. In terms of successor, that is more difficult to say because really in the process in the past, that successor would have been identified at the last party Congress, and that was not the case. That also clearly indicates that Xi Jinping has no desire to hand over the reins of leadership to anyone else. And a specific successor, I think, might be difficult to identify at this party Congress, in part because some of those who I thought 5 years ago might have been successors are probably now getting too old to take over. So we'll need to look at, who is young that might be appointed. We do know there'll be a significant turnover. 2 or 3 of the Standing Committee of the Politburo, formerly the most powerful organ, will step down. A further 8 of the Politburo will step down. And again, that gives Xi Jinping great capacity to appoint his supporters to those key positions. I suspect that the new Politburo will be overwhelmingly stacked, maybe up to 80% of supporters of Xi Jinping. and of course, strong dominance in the standing committee of the Politburo. So it means that whatever happens, Xi will remain firmly in control, accidents notwithstanding. And it will be important to look at, who moves up the ladder. One of the key questions, of course, is who will be premier. As we know, Li Keqiang will have to step down.
Yes.
And there, I think there's a mix of potential candidates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Xi Jinping will remain strongly in control. Professor said you published a book this year titled From Rebel to Ruler, 100 Years of the Chinese Communist Party, and which is already available in the online bookstore. And last year marked the 100th anniversary of the funding of the CCP, but due to the impact of the pandemic and pressure from home and abroad, President Xi's plan to celebrate was disrupted. Now China still maintains the zero-COVID policy. And do you think China will continue to lock down the country from the world? And what is Xi's really intention behind the lockdown policy?
Yeah, at a certain point, they're going to have to start relaxing the policy. Mm-hmm. I mean, we know it's been terribly damaging to China's economic prospects. And of course, it has massively disrupted international trade, international investment into China. Having said that, though, I think there is a fair degree of support amongst the elite, despite growing frustration, I think, amongst the population with these sort of unpredictable and sporadic lockdowns. And I say that for three primary reasons. The first is that the rural healthcare system in China is incredibly weak. Mm-hmm. If they had a serious outbreak of Omicron or whatever comes next, I don't think the rural healthcare system could cope with it. It would be massively overwhelmed, leading to high numbers of deaths, which would undermine the credibility of Xi and the Communist Party itself. Secondly, because of vaccine nationalism, they have not brought in the better vaccines from overseas, which means that they're less effective. They are effective to some extent, but less effective against the disease. And thirdly, the rollout of the vaccinations has been very poor. They didn't really have an aggressive program to vaccinate, for example, those over 60 who might be most vulnerable. So it's going to be tricky to lift the COVID policy. I suspect there will be no major significant shifts until after next year's Lianghui meetings, which will occur in March. Mm-hmm. But what they might, I would imagine they're looking very carefully at what is happening in Macau and Hong Kong to see whether that is something they might be able to slowly adapt. Mm-hmm. And perhaps what they'll do is they'll begin with lightening some of the policies outside of Beijing, but keep Beijing still heavily protected. I mean, one thing they could do is think about the nature of the lockdowns. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've seen, 80 odd or so in the last month or more. And I wonder how many of those were really necessary and how many are just local officials showing fealty to Xi Jinping by locking down the city, and of course not wanting to be seen to make a mistake. So that could give them at least some flexibility. But I think, Rebecca, also in your question is the fact that this is not only damaging to the economy and therefore also in terms of global supply chains. I think the Chinese leadership has also realized that their isolation is costing them in terms of promotion of their own ideas in international fora. And so we've seen more recently Li Jiangshu, Wang Yi, Wang Qishan, and of course Xi Jinping himself finally traveling overseas.
Yes.
So I think they've realized that you can't just do this like we are on Zoom. At some point you need to have real personal contact to project their influence and their ideas.
Thank you very much, Professor Tony Sach, for sharing so valuable views with our audience here in Taiwan. And we look forward to see you very soon in Taipei. Thank you and goodbye.